So welcome, I'm Dr. Annika Lena, and I'm here with Dr. Tonatiuh Melgarejo today. And as the title is indicating, we're going to talk about canine plant-based nutrition, both with respect to clinical health outcomes, also the evolutionary basis and the global One Health rationale. This is the talk that we gave very recently at the Western Veterinary Conference. So what we'll go through, just as indicated here by the objectives, is to try to first define what is the rationale from a One Health perspective for implementing canine plant-based nutrition in clinical practice. Also, just very briefly, just having recognizing that there are complete canine plant-based nutrition products available commercially within the US. Now, Dr. Melgarejo is going to speak about the scientific basis that enables dogs to thrive on canine PBN. And then last but not least, describe what are the outcomes of feeding companion dogs more long-term. So the results we have from our one-year study. So if we are speaking about One Health, what we are typically referring to is, as the schematic on the left is indicating, this intersection between health in human and non-human animals and environmental health. And what we really like to emphasize is that this happens in the context, of course, of this greater equation that more recently has been termed planetary health. So the importance here really is to think about that the health of individuals, and this is true both for ourselves as well as, of course, the dogs we live with and work with, that really is a context that gets increasingly greater as we're moving through public health, global health, One Health, and finally planetary health. And by doing so, we are asking everyone to also pay attention really to the notion of the health of individuals really being inherently dependent upon having healthy ecosystems, so natural systems that are flourishing, and also that everyone is acting as stewards of these limited natural resources. So if we take a moment to initially look at what is the health, the human health and the public health status, and we're looking at the US for a moment. Now, the table on the right is from a JAMA publication 2021, so the Journal of the American Medical Association, showing the leading causes of death in the US. And as indicated here with this box, the red box, heart disease, as I think we all know, is at the very, very top. And this is accounting for COVID-19 related deaths as well. And what is very, very important to note is if we go to the left here, JAMA publication from 2018, what we're seeing here, if we look at the US burden of diseases, dietary risks are at the very, very top. So when we're talking risk factors, dietary risks are known to be at the very, very top of the list here. We're looking at number of deaths on the x-axis, and we're looking at the different risk factors. So what that means is effectively that most of the deaths are preventable and most are actually caused by dietary risks. This is incredibly important when we're thinking about, of course, the impact on individuals, families, communities, and of course, the nation as a whole. As indicated also, if we look at US healthcare spending, it's upwards of $4 trillion per year. And most of the spending is actually accounted for upwards of 80%, according to some estimates, are actually non-communicable diseases. So there's a tremendous amount of money spent and, of course, a significant amount of life lost when we're really thinking about diets and dietary risks. Now, if we take a moment to look towards cultures worldwide that traditionally are plant-based, the contrast that we very, very quickly find is that coronary artery disease, which is the heart disease that is killing so many people in this country and others who are living on typical Western diets, Now, in traditionally plant-based cultures worldwide, and some here are listed on the slide, atherosclerosis is essentially non-existent. So if we compare that and look at some of the work that has been conducted by pioneers in lifestyle medicine. So here's a couple of examples, Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Calvin Assistant, and Dr. Kim Williams. We know that, excuse me, not only is atherosclerosis preventable, but in many cases also reversible. And there's a schematic here showing, or some images shown here of PET scan and angio. And what it's showing is that it is possible through the intervention of plant-based nutrition only to actually restore myocardial perfusion, which is what we're seeing here on the PET scan, so before and after treatment. So actually restoring myocardial perfusion. And this is only after 3 weeks of plant-based nutritional intervention. And on the angio on the right-hand side, actual reversal, and this is 32 months of plant-based nutritional intervention, where there's actually restoration of blood flow in the coronary artery, the LAD. Now, Dr. Kim Williams mentioned here that sort of tongue in cheek, that there's two types of cardiologists. There's vegans and those who haven't read the data. In a more recent talk, he actually added, well, there might be those who read the data but haven't acted on it yet. So it's very, very important to really keep in mind that we do have this wealth of data from lifestyle medicine pioneers to actually show that these diseases that is causing so much havoc are actually preventable and reversible. And of course, heart disease being right there up at the top. Now, oftentimes there's confusion about, from a human health perspective, well, what should we eat? What's healthy? People don't agree. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And what is shown here is actually the True Health Initiative established by Dr. David Katz out of Yale University. So to show a global consensus on use of lifestyle as medicine, and really to say this is a coalition, world-renowned health expert, actually trying to cut through the noise and really saying this is a time-honored, proven principle about using lifestyle as medicine. And by saying lifestyle, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, the schematic here shown on the left, really has to do with plant-based eating, so healthful eating, of course, physical activity, management of both stress and sleep and healthy relationship, and of course, avoidance of any environmental exposures that are unhealthy. So these are really well-known and time-honored principles. Now, one can say, well, why are we not acting upon this? Why is this actually implemented at a greater scale? As shown here on the left-hand side, one problem also has to do with that the obesity epidemic is impacting physicians, and actually physicians, for the most part, is lacking significantly in nutrition education. There's one piece of data here showing that one study actually found that 40% of the physicians in one study were overweight, and around 1/4 are obese. So that is one sort of parallel that has been drawn also to saying, well, when we look back in time and we sort of look at how commonly the tobacco industry were actually managing to get anyone really from doctors to Santa Claus and babies to endorse the industry, we know that these ads that are shown were actually from the 1920s into the 50s, where this was considered common practice, and even physicians were smoking actively and endorsing the tobacco industry. So many have pointed to that similarities, that's really where we're at with nutrition at this point. So needless to say, that constitutes a major issue. So as we're moving through this talk, what we're trying to emphasize is that this is about the planetary health model, and really thinking about the health of all species. So this is about trying to find ways to say, how can we both safeguard the health of course, the dogs we live with, people, those we love, but also in general, looking at biodiversity throughout the world. Now, in sort of starting that conversation, if we're looking at publications that came actually more than 15 years ago from United Nations agencies, there's a couple of examples shown here of what has been published and what has actually been in the literature for quite a while. What is the adverse impact if we're looking at global greenhouse gas emissions and just looking at industrial food animal production, so the livestock industry? Now, the FAO, their first report came out around 2006, and the World Bank Group also did a report 2009, and there's one NPO that did a report more recently, 2019. And the take-home message is that the livestock industry is playing a tremendous role when it comes to emissions and global greenhouse gases. And these estimates, as you can see, they're ranging from basically down to around 15% in one report from the World Bank Group, 51%, and more recently, even upwards of 80%. Now, what is important when we also look at this is what were the authors of these reports? And of course, we need to think about what is the expertise. And the World Bank Group was actually environmental science experts. So there's no doubt about that the industry is having a significant impact when it comes to climate change. The documentary Cowspiracy was released in 2014, and this is one graphic that is from the associated website, and the impact on climate change is listed here at the top. Now, what is important to keep in mind is also we know that there are these significant adverse impacts really when it comes to both freshwater use, significant waste production from the industry, significant amount of also arable land use. And very, very sadly, when we're looking at industrial scale animal agriculture, also a main driver really when it comes to impact on both deforestation and also species extinction. And even if we're looking at the world ocean and we're looking at dead zones. So what I did when I did my MPH actually was I had the opportunity to work with the late Dr. Kirk Smith from the UC Berkeley School of Public Health, who was a professor of global environmental health. He's one of the experts that were actually interviewed for this documentary, and one of the really the leaders in the field of global health, environmental health, is listed here, also very actively involved with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And what I effectively did at that point was to do a scientific review of everything that was presented in this documentary, and this actually is supported by the literature, and these numbers are actually checking out when you actually go and do the review. So it's a very, very significant impact. What is also interesting is that some of the major medical journals, here's an example from one publication in the New England Journal of Medicine, where increasingly the emphasis is being put on climate change as a health emergency. And here's one quote really to say, as physicians, right, there's a group as healthcare professionals really to have a special responsibility, right, to actually work to curtail greenhouse gas emission, and that has become part of the healing mission. There's another very recent example from 2023 here, the American Journal of Cardiology, that is also pointing towards nutrition equity being a moral imperative. So looking at the impact of this typical Western diet, meaning very high in animal-based foods, of course, derived from industrial food animal production, and that really we're looking at the nutritional aspect and the ethical aspect that this is highly problematic. It's very well documented that this involves cruelty to the animals in this industry, but that is also that these nutritional framework is actually contributing when it comes to both medical and moral harms in humans. So there's increasing awareness. Now, as we're moving through the talk here, and Dr. Melgarejo is going to be speaking more specifically about what is the impact of dog food production when it comes to environmental health. And this is one paper out of UCLA group here showing if we're looking at adverse environmental impact related to animal agriculture, we're looking at production of food for dogs and cats, that activity is actually responsible for around 1/3 of that. So very, very substantially. Now, one slide here just to bring awareness to the fact that plant-based nutrition is commercially available in the US and also Europe, other places as well around the world. But here are some examples just shown from the different companies, both those who are fully dedicated to plant-based nutrition and also one just example of companies that may have options where they're actually offering plant-based nutrition or vegan recipes specifically for dogs. So the importance, as Dr. Melgarejo will be speaking about next, has to do with also looking at what is the evolutionary basis. What is it that actually has made the dog able to thrive on these type of dietary frameworks?
Thank you so much, Dr. Line. So let's go to the next points of this presentation. So we know that good health relies to a great extent into proper nutrition. And we need to have all these nutrients coming from a great diet. And we know that the micronutrients, for example, the protein, the carbohydrates, the lipids, need to be present in the right amount in the diets that we are providing to our pets, along with vitamins and minerals. Traditionally, we have been creating these commercially available diets based on the assumption that the dog is a carnivore. So most of the diets that are currently available globally are meat-based. But the more we learn and the more literature is coming, and talking to people outside of the United States, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in parts of Europe, we have realized that actually dogs, they don't necessarily need to have these meat-based diets. So we wanted to investigate what happens with canine plant-based nutrition. When we provide all these protein and lipids and carbohydrates and all these micronutrients to our dogs, are we going to have healthy pets? And of course, the questions is immediately, the questions are coming. Okay, so do you really have proteins in plants? Where are you going to get the taurine and the carnitine? Because we know that carnitine is highly abundant in meat, but not in plants. Other people may say, okay, vitamin B12. B12 comes from meat, which in fact, it doesn't come from meat. It comes from bacteria that is present on the ground, cyanobacteria, that produces the vitamin B12 and the vitamin D and the calcium. What about the important omega-3 and omega-6? Where are we going to get them? And if we get our pets a plant-based diet, are we providing them with too many sugars for the starch, for the carbohydrates that we are providing? So with all these questions, we decided to started looking at the literature. What is there that is scientifically proven that actually dogs may be great digesters of starch, omnivores? And there is an interesting paper that was published in 2009 that they took actually two groups of Siberian Huskies, these sprint racing dogs, elite athletes, and then they provide a commercial available diet that was meat-based to a group of 6 Huskies, and then a diet that they designed that it was meat-free, diet, pretty much a plant-based diet, to a second group with another 6 huskies. And then they fed this diet for 16 weeks, 2 weeks actually before the competition, and then the weeks after competition, the weeks during the competition, and 4 weeks after the competition. So a total of 16 weeks, 3 months. And then they did physical examinations and blood work at different points, and they recorded the finding at 0, 8, and 16 weeks. It's important to note that these diets, the commercial diet that the first group received, it was meat-based, but it was based on poultry. And the second diet that was meat-free diet, it was based on the wood, all corn, and soy. And what they found, it was quite interesting, probably not surprising for some of us that have seen the power of these plant-based diets. All athletes from the 2 groups, 6 and 6, the 12 athletes, remain in excellent condition as long as they were fed these diets. They measure some parameters, and then they found that the red blood cell count, the hemoglobin, and the packed cell volume remain within normal limits in all the dogs, either meat-based or plant-based diets. And actually what happens when you have these competitions and you need a lot of oxygen to actually finish the race, and if you are well trained, some of these dogs actually increase the red blood cells to compensate for the oxygen that is needed. And what they found is that both groups increase the red blood cells and hemoglobin without any distinction. So this was a very interesting study where they actually found that feeding these animals 3 months a plant-based diet, they didn't find any difference between the meat-based and the plant-based diet. In 2013, there was a very interesting paper that unfortunately was not very well read by the veterinary community, me including myself, or our students and some of our colleagues, because it was published in one of the best scientific journals, Nature, but it's a journal that we pretty much don't have within the scope for our curriculum most of the times. But this actually paper was quite interesting. It was actually published, and it was made possible by different groups around the world: Harvard University, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Uppsala University, and Hedmark University in Scandinavia. And this group actually came together, and then they analyzed the whole genome from dogs and wolves. They use a lot of dogs and a lot of wolves, and they look at close to 4 million genetic variants. They identify 36 genomic regions to find out, okay, what are the gene targets for selection that we can say that actually these genes played a major role for dog domestication. And they found genes for the brain function, the nervous system, and several genes that participated in digestion and absorption, including some of the starch metabolic processes. And what they found was quite interesting. And in this particular slide, you will have here the intestinal lumen. Everything that is going to happen here, it happens before absorption. This is digestion of the starches. And then in the blood is when actually the glucose is going to be absorbed. So what happens when these dogs or cats or humans, these monogastrics, they get dietary starches into the intestinal lumen? Well, there's an enzyme that is a pancreatic enzyme that is called amylase that is going to help to digest these very complex carbohydrates into oligosaccharides. And the main oligosaccharide that is going to be produced is the maltose. And this maltose is going to be present in the intestinal lumen, and it's going to be traveling towards the apical side of the enterocytes. And in the enterocytes, it's called the brush border enzymes. They're going to find this maltase glucoamylase enzyme that is going to transform or digest maltose into the simplest form of sugars, which is the glucose. And this glucose is the one that is going to be looking for specific transporters. And we know that the SGT1, the sodium glucose cotransporter 1, is the classical and most important transporter that is present into the enterocytes to actually to absorb the glucose, so the glucose can get into the general circulation. So this happens in the monogastric world. This happens in our intestine, in the dog's intestine. What they found is that, okay, let's compare the wolf and the dog to see what the main differences are with regard to dietary to starch digestion. And what they found is that actually the amylase, the first enzyme that is participating in the digestion of the dietary starches, it was 20-fold higher, the expression in dog pancreata. It was amazing the amount of molecules that the dog was producing in much higher extent than the wolf. So imagine you have 20, close to 30-fold higher expression in the pancreas of these dogs compared to wolves. And then what happens after this? It goes into the maltose, and the maltose, they found that actually these brush border enzymes, they found that there's 12-fold higher expression in the dog intestinal mucosa. So all these higher production of proteins or enzymes are happening in the dog, not in the wolf. So if you put together, just mathematically, you have here a 40-fold higher expression of molecules that are crucial, that are key for digestion of dietary starches. So what happens with the glucose? Once we have the glucose, and they look into the sodium glucose cotransporter into the wolf and the dog, and they found that actually it did not increase in numbers, but there was a single amino acid substitution. In the wolf, it was isoleucine, and in the dog, it was valine. That particular unique single amino acid substitution happened to enhance significantly the glucose uptake of the dog. So putting these three together, and they did a very elegant, very thorough work about bioactivity of these enzymes, and the paper is really a great paper to read. They concluded that these genetic adaptations allowed the ancestors on the motor dogs to actually thrive on diets that they were very rich in starch. And that makes sense because that had to be a crucial step in the early domestication of dogs during the agricultural revolution, when the dogs started, the wolves started just getting closer and closer in the interaction with humans. They needed to start eating what humans were eating. So the questions that we ask is, can actually clinically healthy companion dogs maintain a good health when fed commercially nutritionally complete plant-based diet for a year? And this is the design that we came with. We identified 15 clinically healthy client-owned dogs. And these dogs were from 1 year to 10 years of age. They were adults. And they all were eating a meat-based diet. So what we did is we did a diet transition over a week from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet. And then here at time 0, we started doing the physical examination. We collected the weight data, body condition scores. We got blood work, and the blood, traditionally, or a blood work that we got was CBC, chemistry, urinalysis, but also we were interested in the nutritional part of our dogs, in the nutritional status. So we measure lipid-soluble vitamins, hydrosoluble vitamins. We measure free amino acids in plasma and other amino acid products like L-carnitine and taurine. And we were looking at the cardiac biomarkers. And at the same time, at time 0, when they started with the plant-based diet, we collected feces and urine to analyze the microbiome of these dogs. And then we actually did it every 3 months. We did a physical examination, body weight, body condition score, and every 6 months we collected blood and urine to run this. And after a year, we looked at more than 3,600 biomarkers to analyze the health and nutritional status of these dogs. So what happened is that the CBC, the chemistry, and the urinalysis, along with the thyroid hormone levels, they were no significantly changes, no clinically significant changes from the baseline to the 6 months to the 12 months. There's a lot of data, but we can tell you that there was no changes in these parameters. So one of the main questions that you ask when it comes to plant-based nutrition is, what about the proteins? The amino acids are very important. They're the building blocks of these important proteins that participate in life, from birth to death, pretty much, in growth and metabolism and respiration and all these things. So we looked at the amino acids, these building blocks of peptides and proteins, but we focus on the essential amino acids in dogs, these 10 amino acids that are listed here, because we know that the dog is not able to produce these amino acids. These amino acids, they need to come into the diet, and they need to be bioavailable. So actually the dog can absorb these amino acids and use them pretty much for all metabolic functions that promote health. So when you see here these plasma-free amino acids, we have the 10 amino acids here. We have in the y-axis, we have the concentration, and in the x-axis, we have the time in months, 0, 6, and 12. And if you can see here, this gray area is the 1 to 3rd quartile that the UC Davis Amino Acid Laboratory reported as normal. And we actually calculated the lower normal concentration in some of these, and we have it here in this faint dotted line. So we can see that in every single case, in the 10 essential amino acids, we have all dogs pretty much within normal limits. What's interesting is that most of these amino acids, you see here the median with this horizontal line, the median tend to actually went up in a good number of these amino acids, like the methionine, the lysine. Tryptophan was quite significant, because even though it was within normal limits, because the lower level was here, a good numbers, including tryptophan, of these amino acids, actually, they had a trend to go up into the concentration. So we know at this point that these amino acids were provided by the diet, were absorbed, and they were circulating freely into the bloodstream in our clinically healthy dogs. We decided to actually measure the L-taurine and the L-carnitine. These are not amino acids. They are derived from amino acids, but they're very important for myocardial health. And we know that they have been associated with some canine dilated cardiomyopathy cases. So we wanted, the question is, what happens with taurine and carnitine in our dogs? And we have, again, here the concentration and the time in months, and we know that the taurine, this is the within normal limits in this gray area, the concentration of these molecules, and we know that at least taurine, it went up, and the carnitine, it went from the medium, and it went up. They remain within normal limits, but here we show that actually one of these main concerns that people and colleagues have about, well, what about L-carnitine? L-carnitine is supplemented to the plant-based diet as a synthetic form of this molecule, but it's also supplemented in meat-based diets. So the supplementation happens regardless of the origin of the ingredients, just because the companies want to make sure that L-carnitine is going to be present in enough amounts to maintain and promote health in our dogs. When we started looking at nutritional parameters that can help us actually evaluate our dogs, we look into the vitamin A, vitamin D, and the vitamin E, and we separate our vitamins in lipid and water-soluble. And these lipid-soluble vitamins, they play a major role in growth and cell division. Vitamin D, for example, is important for our immune system. We now know that there are receptors in our bodies, in the dog's bodies, in the cat's bodies, that they are receptors for vitamin D in some of these immunoprofessional cells, that they play a role in an important role in the immune system, into the immune system. So we look into these three important lipid-soluble vitamins. And as you can see here, vitamin A was within normal limits. There was no statistically there was significant, but it was all within normal limits. We look here in vitamin E, and vitamin E was higher than normal in 0, 6, and 12 months. And when we talk to the people responsible at the lab in Michigan State University and the veterinary diagnostic lab, my colleague that was there told me that vitamin D tends to be higher in dogs, but there is no clinical condition associated with vitamin E higher than normal concentration. So pretty much these were as expected, which was one of the most interesting findings that we encountered in our feeding trial, is that out of our 15 clinically healthy dogs, at time 0, that means right there when we switch from meat-based to a plant-based diet, 7, almost half of the population, 7 out of 15 dogs, they were vitamin D insufficient, based on the data that we have from the Michigan State University lab. And then when we decided at that point that we were not going to do anything, any therapeutic intervention, because these dogs were clinically healthy, and it was almost like an incidental finding because we were looking deeper than the regular hematological parameters. And they were insufficient. They were not at a level that were deficient. So when we look at them again in 6 months, we found that actually one dog remained with vitamin D insufficiency, but the other 6, they actually jump into within normal limits of the vitamin D. And at the end of the feeding trial, after 12 months, all dogs were within normal limits of vitamin D. So that was a very interesting situation, because the only thing that we did with these not patients, but with these dogs, is just the dietary intervention. We didn't change the diet. We continue with the diet, and actually these vitamin D insufficiencies resolve with time. We look into classical water-soluble vitamins. They have been used for many years as a measure of health. And we know that cobalamin, it's a factor that is important. This vitamin is very important for rapidly growing cells, meaning your intestinal cells, your skin cells, your red blood cells. It's crucial for doing that. It's also associated with good reproduction and immunity. And traditionally, it has been used as a clinical marker for intestinal health. The folate, we know that it's vital for DNA synthesis, and that's why when women are pregnant, they need to check the folate levels, because pretty much the DNA synthesis and whatever is happening inside of that woman is pretty much creating new life. And new life comes from DNA, so we need to make sure that the DNA synthesis is in the right direction, providing enough folate. It's also important for cell production, and it's another clinical marker for gut health. And what we found here is that cobalamin, again, this is the concentration and the time in months, cobalamin was within normal limits from the dogs when they were in a meat-based diet at 0 months. 6 and 12 months later, all dogs remain within normal limits. The folate, we found that actually 6 of our dogs were below normal, the folate concentration. At 6 months, 1 dog remained lower than normal concentration. At 12 months, 3 dogs remained lower than normal concentration. Now, we started looking into that to see if actually these dogs were folate insufficient, and they required a clinical intervention, a folate therapy. And what we found is that actually, number one, the cobalamin and folate are markers that have been used traditionally for many years, but they have not been used, or the sensitivity and specificity of these assays have not been established. So they're clinically important, and it's part of the diagnostic tool when you have a case, but pretty much there's no specificity or sensitivity. So we need to be careful how we interpret that. And number two, in the cases that they have found that there is folate insufficient, in the webpage of the lab that we submitted this to Texas A&M, the gastrointestinal lab, it says that dogs that they don't present clinical signs of folate insufficiency, they should not be supplemented. And they don't recommend supplementation of the folate. So we follow that, and we follow these dogs, and they remain clinically healthy and happy for 12 months. And some of these dogs, we have been following them for more than 3 years, and they remain healthy. So this was an interesting observation, but pretty much both folate and cobalamin, more importantly, cobalamin, was within normal limits. Because of the concerns that they have been raised lately about these diets with regard to heart health, we decided to look into cardiac biomarkers, and we measured two: cardiac troponin I and the N-terminal pro-B-type natriuretic peptide. And we know that traditionally the troponin I is associated with acute myocardial injury, versus the NT-proBNP is associated with stretch, with a myocardial overload and the cardiomyocyte strain. And this is what we found. The concentration at time zero, that means when the dogs just switch from the meat base to the plant base, we found in this particular chart, you have the red dots are abnormal. The company know that this is abnormal. It's highly suggestive of acute myocardial injury. In the blue dots that we have here, it's equivocal. Company have not established if it's normal or abnormal, and the black dots are within normal limits. So we know that at time zero, we have some dogs that were highly suggestive of acute injury, myocardial injury. At 6 months, we have some dogs that remain equivocal, but we have a lower concentration, but still we have 4 dogs that they were associated with levels that were abnormal. And after 12 months, only 1 dog showed an abnormal concentration of cardiac troponin I. And it is interesting that this dog actually happened to be this dog. So actually the trend was going down, and most of the dogs remain 3 equivocal, and the rest 11 dogs were within normal limits. The pro-BNP, we have here on the right, 3 dogs were equivocal at the beginning at 0 time, but then at 6 and 12 months, all dogs remained within normal limits. So we acknowledge that this should be accompanied by echocardiography. And at that point, due to structural barriers, we were not able to do the echocardiography, but at least we tried to do in a non-invasive way to evaluate the cardiac health of these patients, and this is the result that we have from them. We call the dogs, not the dogs, we call the clients every month, and we interview the clients. We ask a series of questions. How's the dog doing? The fecal material, urination, defecation, appetite. Is your dog bright, alert, responsive? Any changes? We ask the owners to actually weigh the dogs and to provide all this information. And then we brought back the dog every 3 months to get our own body weight data and the body condition score. And what we have seen here is that actually the body weight did not change significantly within the 0, 6, and 12 months. Most dogs remain within the weight that they started. However, the body condition score was interesting because we have one dog that was obese and several dogs, 3 dogs that were overweight. And over time, this dog went from 8 to 7, and the other dogs, a couple of them, they went from overweight to within normal limits when it comes to the body condition score. So this diet is not intended to lose weight, but this was an interesting observation just to make sure that just the plant-based diet, the dogs didn't get overweight or didn't dramatically lose body weight. And the results are here. So the original question that we have about can clinically healthy companion dogs maintain good health when fed a commercial, nutritionally complete plant-based diet for a year? And it was an interesting experimental design because we have a clinically healthy dog that was eating a meat-based diet. And after a year, we wanted to see if actually this dog remained healthy. So sometimes when you have healthy and you want to compare healthy, it's not an easy task. If you have a diseased individual and then you do an intervention in the dietary or pharmaceutical intervention, it would be easier, probably clinically and statistically, to try to prove that that intervention was successful. But in this case, it was healthy to healthy. And after measuring more than 3,600 biomarkers into these dogs along a year, we concluded that actually, yes, these dogs, they not only remained healthy, but they were clinically healthier based on the plant-based diet results. And also because we found out that particularly with the vitamin D, that these dogs were half of the population, almost half of the population was vitamin D insufficient. And at the end of the year, none of the dogs had vitamin D lower in the lower than normal concentration. So we know that, yes, we can actually provide plant-based nutrition for a year, and our dogs are going to be not only healthy, but healthier based on these parameters. So the summary for that, we know that these clinically healthy dogs, it's important. These were clinically healthy dogs. We are not evaluating disease. We are not evaluating puppies or elderly patients. We are looking at clinically healthy dogs, and they all maintain great health when they were fed this complete based diet. And it's important at this point to mention that this particular diet that we selected, the main source of protein is pea protein. And pea protein has been demonized, like, well, probably peas are responsible for that, and lentils and the staples and all these things. And we proved that actually these 15 clinically healthy dogs, they remain healthy when they were fed over a year plant-based diet, which main source of protein was pea. The dog not only remained healthy, but they maintained the nutritional status based on the concentration of all the markers that we evaluated, the free essential amino acids, the L-carnitine, the L-taurine, the water-soluble vitamins, the fat-soluble vitamins, when they were being fed this diet for a year. And all the biometrics, the body condition score, the body weight, along with the blood work, urine analysis, and importantly, the client-reported history confirmed that all dogs maintain physical health during the duration of this feeding trial. So the last couple of slides, I just want to say that some people, when we were doing this, they were not criticizing, but wondering, Tona, why are you doing this particular research? It's kind of silly because the dogs are carnivores, and you are trying to impose a diet that is just probably fashionable diet into dogs. And I told them that sometimes we just need to read, and we need to evaluate other things that what we believe or what we assume. And I'm going to give you a piece of information that is important. Dr. Lynn covered to a great extent all the things related to the planetary health and the climate change and the relationship with food animal production. And this is an important piece of information, because if we take all the dogs and cats in United States, and if they were a separate country, they would rank fifth in global meat consumption, just our dogs and cats. And they would be only surpassed by Russia, Brazil, US, and China. And this is not something that we came and we said, okay, let's just do some calculations. Professor Oaking from UCLA actually wrote this paper in 2017 where he did all this calculation, and that was actually placed in the webpage of the Institute of Environment and Sustainability of UCLA, where they said if our pets, dogs and cats, were at their own country, they would rank fifth in global meat consumption. So we know that long term, this is not sustainable, and we need to look for alternatives to feed our dear friends. So the conclusions from this study is that this study is the longest and most comprehensive clinical feeding trial on plant-based nutrition in dogs to date. We have, doing the Canine PBN, a concrete and logical alternative to actually circumvent all these ethical, environmental dilemmas of feeding dogs meat-based diets. And based on the information from the group of Harvard and MIT and the people that did these plant-based studies in elite athletes, plus all the anecdotal and testimonial information that we have, along with the scientific evidence that we have collected, the sum of this existing evidence reflect that domestic dogs can thrive in canine plant-based nutrition. So I think we teach our students, and we used to teach our students, that dogs are carnivores, cats are obligated carnivores, and we need to actually take one step back and say, okay, probably this is what we were teaching and we learn, but I think it's time to unlearn and relearn the new information. Dogs can digest starches to a much greater extent than the ancestors, the wolves, the animals where they came from. So I think this is something that we need to have an open mind for that. So just to summarize and to conclude our presentation, these are the take-home points that we want you to remember. So these products, these plant-based products that are nutritionally complete, are available in the US market. And also we know that for decades they have been available in Europe and in other countries. Dogs have actually experienced this evolutionary adaptation to the most basic level, to the DNA, that have enabled them to digest starch with a high efficiency. Adult clinically healthy dogs can thrive when they are eating a complete, well-balanced diet. We are not recommending you to go get tofu and get some lettuce and feed your dog. You need to actually look into the clinically complete, well-balanced diets that are available already commercially. The point that I made in the past is that canine endurance athletes can also maintain even optimal performance level, not only for the daily activities, but when they were exposed to these 10 weeks of intense exercise, they actually maintain health. So, and remember the last point, the pet food in the United States is responsible for close to 30% of the environmental impact from the industrial animal production with respect to the use of land, water, fossil fuels, biocides, and waste production. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you enjoy your presentation. Have a great day.
Thank you again so much for your attention, and we appreciate you watching this recording. We wanted to acknowledge everyone who contributed to the crowdfunding, to everything that went into this research and everything that made this possible. We are intentionally not mentioning specific names to make sure we don't leave anyone out. It has been definitely a team effort. So thank you again. We are deeply appreciative. We also wanted to encourage anyone who's interested in continuing the discussion to reach out to us. And we have the preprint of this one-year study available with the QR code as indicated here, and our contact information is included in that as well. So thank you again, and we look forward to continuing the work and continuing the discussions. Thank you.